It was supposed to be the perfect Christmas. Our first real family barbecue since the world went quiet, since the kids grew a little older, since my husband said we should make memories again. I remember standing over the grill, laughing with my apron on, flipping burgers while the smell of rosemary chicken drifted into the cool December air. I remember the music playing from the porch speakers, old soul classics, the kind that made you sway without meaning to. I remember the joy, the kind you almost taste. And I remember the moment it shattered. I had run inside to grab more napkins and sliced watermelon. My cousin's daughter was trying to sneak a cookie and I playfully scolded her. The house was full of movement, noise, joy. Until I heard a voice I knew too well, his, and then, a laugh I didn't recognize. Soft. Intimate. Not mine. I followed the sound like instinct. Quietly. Slowly. Like I already knew what I was going to find. Past the hallway. Past the coats piled on the bench. Past the door that was cracked open just enough. And there they were. Him. And her. In our guest room. Her back to the wall. His hands too familiar on someone who wasn't me. I didn't speak. Not at first. My silence filled the room before my words did. He turned, pale, like he saw a ghost. She gasped, tugged her dress down, and for a moment, none of us moved. The air was heavier than the cold outside. "Merry Christmas," I said, voice calm, too calm, and I walked out. Just like that. I didn't scream. I didn't throw plates or demand explanations, because I already knew. This wasn't new. This was confirmation. I had seen the way he pulled away during hugs, the way he kept his phone upside down, the way his eyes drifted at restaurants. This was just the day the lie stopped pretending to be truth. The party was still in full swing. Laughter, drinks clinking, children playing tag in the yard. No one knew I had just walked out of a war zone. And maybe that was my power. I smiled, served drinks, laughed, because I wasn't going to let him ruin Christmas for my family. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. See, what he didn't know, what she didn't know, was that I had built an empire. Quietly, steadily, brick by invisible brick. While he stayed out late working. While he questioned my hobbies. While he dismissed my dreams as cute little projects. I was building, designing, creating. And today he was about to learn just how big I had become. I waited until after dessert. The family gathered near the fire pit, hot cocoa in hand, kids bundled in blankets. My mother-in-law was telling a story from her youth, and that's when I stood up. "Everyone," I said, "can I have a moment?" They turned, quieting quickly. I never asked for attention. Which is why, when I did, they listened. "I just want to thank you all for being here," I began. "It means the world to have family gathered under one roof." I looked at him then, his eyes wary. Her sitting 3 seats over, pretending not to exist. "And I want to share something I've been working on this year," I said, pulling out my phone. "You all know I started a little online business during lockdown." Murmurs of agreement. Well, it's no longer little. I tapped the screen and mirrored it to the outdoor TV. The screen lit up with numbers, big ones, 6 figures, then, photos, press features, product lines, logos, testimonials, gasps, applause. "As of last month," I said, voice steady, eyes on him, "my business hit $1.2 million in revenue." Silence. "I bought this house last year," I continued, "with my name on the deed." His head jerked slightly. "I've been the one paying the mortgage for 14 months. All of it, quietly, steadily, because I needed to prove something to myself." I turned toward him. "And to you." A hush fell over the yard. "While you were out playing games," I said softly, "I was building a kingdom." I looked at the girl, woman who had been in my guest room. "You're sitting in the house I bought, wearing the bracelet I designed, drinking wine I imported, from a glass I curated, for a brand I built." She blinked, frozen. He opened his mouth, closed it. What could he say? I smiled. "Merry Christmas," I repeated. "You're both dismissed." My family didn't say anything for a beat. And then my sister started clapping. One by one, everyone joined. My aunt whistled. My mother wiped a tear. I exhaled. Not because I was finished, but because I had finally started. He left that night, quietly, no bags, just shame. I changed the locks the next morning, had the papers drawn up by lunch. And when his lawyer called to discuss assets, I simply forwarded the documentation that proved every single thing under that roof was mine. Legally, completely, undeniably. He asked to talk. I declined. There was nothing left to say. He had gambled a queen for a pawn. And the game was already over. That first week after the barbecue felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm. Everything was still, but nothing was the same. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful anymore. It was deafening. I could hear the echo of betrayal in every corner. Every room he touched felt tainted. I changed the sheets. Then the curtains. Then the locks. And finally the energy. People started calling. Family. Friends. Even his sister, who never liked me until that night. I never knew you had all that going on, she said. Neither did he, I replied. And that was the truth. He never asked. Never cared. He assumed I was just the woman who folded his laundry and managed our calendar. Not the CEO. Not the visionary. Not the empire. I threw myself into work, but this time it wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. I had something rare, freedom. Not just from him. From doubt. From silence. From the version of me that used to shrink just to make him feel taller. A magazine reached out. They wanted to do a feature. From BBQ to billionaire moves, the journalist joked. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was real. My story was becoming more than survival. It was a map for others. My DMs overflowed. Women. All kinds. Stay-at-home moms. Artists. Engineers. You gave me courage, they said. I left after 5 years of gaslighting. I just launched my business. I finally said no. Not because I was sad, but because the ripple had begun. One afternoon, I went to the lawyer's office to finalize everything. He was already there, sitting stiffly in a navy blazer he used to wear to impress investors. I walked in wearing a white suit. Power. Peace. Clean slates. You look different, he said. I smiled. That's because I am. The papers were signed. No contest. No fight. Just fact. On the way out, he stopped me. Do you hate me? I looked at him. Really looked. The man I once loved. The man who forgot how to love me back. No, I said. You taught me who I was, by forgetting who I am. I left him standing there, holding papers and regret. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on the same porch where I gave that Christmas speech. I breathed in the cold air. Crisp. Honest. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I was. The brand kept growing. I hired a team. Women like me. Overlooked. Underestimated. Our office had a wall where everyone could write one sentence, why I stayed too long. And another, why I finally left. The stories were raw. Beautiful. Brave. One woman wrote, I stayed because I had no money. Underneath it she later scribbled, I left because I found my worth. I took a picture of that. Framed it in my office. He texted once. I saw the article. You're amazing. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need his validation. I had mine, and that was enough. At our next family gathering this time for Easter, I showed up alone. Not sad. Not broken. But complete. My aunt pulled me aside. You know your glow is louder than your silence used to be, she said. I hugged her. That's because I stopped dimming it. He wasn't invited, but I heard he drove by, heard the laughter, realized what he lost. That's the thing about betraying someone who is building in silence, you never hear the foundation until it's already unshakable. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a business summit. They wanted me to tell the story. Not just of the brand, but of the woman behind it. I stood backstage, palms sweating, heart pounding. But I wasn't afraid. I was alive. I stepped onto the stage in front of hundreds of people, lights warm on my face, and I began. I lost everything I thought I needed, and gained everything I never knew I had the power to create. Silence. Then nods. Then tears. I spoke for 30 minutes. About betrayal. About awakening. About empire building in the shadows of someone else's arrogance. And when I finished, they stood. They clapped like they saw themselves in me. Because they did. Afterward, a young woman found me in the lobby. "He told me I'd never survive without him," she said. Her voice trembled. "And then you spoke." I hugged her. Not with pity but with recognition. I had been, and now she saw what came after. I started a podcast. Unshaken. I told stories. Mine. Others. Every episode ended the same way. "You are not broken, you are breaking open." It climbed the chart, not because I was famous, but because I was real. Then came the letter. Handwritten. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. His. I saw the billboard. It read, "You look happy." There was words that once would have wrecked me. Now they just passed through. Like wind. I folded the letter and tossed it into the fireplace. Watched the flames eat the page. And with it the last of his hold on me. One Sunday morning, I was featured in a national newspaper. Cover story. The CEO who took Christmas and turned it into a comeback. I laughed. Not at the headline, but at the irony. Because Christmas used to be about giving. That year it was about reclaiming. I began mentoring. Women going through divorce. Survivors of emotional abuse. Dreamers without roadmap. I wasn't their savior. Just their mirror. Proof that you can walk through fire and come out painted in gold. People often ask me, "Do you miss him?" I smile. I miss the idea of who I thought he was. But the reality? No. Because I love who I am now too much to want to go back. Sometimes I dream of the barbecue. The clinking glasses. The moment I saw them. And in the dream I always smile. Not out of pain, but pride. Because that day didn't break me, it built me. And without it, I'd still be standing in his shadow instead of shining on my own. The truth is, healing didn't happen overnight. It came in layers. Some arrived like gentle rain, unexpected but welcome. Others tore through me like lightning, illuminating all the parts of myself I had ignored to keep someone else comfortable. I spent nights awake, not crying, but reflecting. Not mourning him, but mourning the version of myself I lost in that relationship. I started journaling. At first it was angry, spiteful, full of how dare he and why wasn't I enough. But over time it softened, became about me, my hopes, my fears, my voice. One morning I flipped back through the pages and realized something. My journal had slowly stopped mentioning his name at all. I redecorated the house. Not just to remove him but to reclaim space. I painted the guest room, the one he stained with betrayal, a deep sapphire blue. I hung art I loved, put books on the shelves I actually read. I turned it into a studio, a sanctuary for my ideas. And somehow the pain stopped echoing there. I started waking up earlier, walking barefoot on the porch while the sky was still sleepy. Drinking tea in silence. Not because I needed to think but because I could. There's a freedom tastes like stillness when you're not rushing to be enough for someone who never noticed your effort. I changed my wardrobe. Not for revenge, but because I finally saw myself clearly. I wore colors I used to avoid because he didn't like them. Lipsticks that made me feel bold. Heels I had boxed away. Every outfit became a silent declaration, I'm not shrinking anymore. One of my biggest breakthroughs came on a random Tuesday. I was reorganizing the kitchen when I found a box of old photos. Us. Smiling. Pretending. And I realized, I didn't miss any of it. Not the trips. Not the dinners. Not the nights he'd pull away after long days at work. I missed who I thought we were. But not who we actually were. That realization set me free. I had dinner with an old friend one evening, someone I hadn't seen in years. She looked at me mid-bite and said, "You're different. Brighter." I smiled. That's what happens when you finally stop trying to be digestible to people who never had the appetite for you anyway. I started saying yes to things that scared me. A book deal. A speaking tour. A retreat in Bali. I stopped waiting for the perfect moment and started creating it. I traveled solo for the first time in my life and discovered that solitude isn't loneliness, it's luxury. During a conference in New York, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your Christmas story saved me," she said. "I was going to go back to him, then I heard your words. I didn't." I hugged her like a sister. Because she was one in this army of reborn women who rise from ashes. My ex tried reaching out again, this time with a long email. Apologies, regrets, even nostalgia. I didn't reply. Closure, I learned, isn't something they give you. It's something you give yourself when you stop reopening wounds for people who wouldn't stop the bleeding when they had the chance. I invested in a nonprofit for single mothers trying to rebuild their lives. I hosted a holiday dinner for women who had nowhere else to go. We laughed, cried, shared stories. And as I looked around that table, I thought, this is the family I was meant to build. Christmas came again. 1 year since the barbecue, my family gathered, those who stayed, those who returned, and those I chose. We grilled, we danced, we sang. Someone asked if I'd give another speech. I hesitated. Then I lost something last Christmas, I said, but I found myself, and I'll never lose her again. Applause. Real. Earned. And as the fire crackled beside me, I knew this wasn't revenge. This was resurrection. I never expected peace to feel so fierce. It came wrapped in laughter that had nowhere to hide, in quiet mornings warm with sun, in the steady hum of my own heartbeat reminding me I was alive on my own terms. That third Christmas, I didn't even think about him. Instead, I woke before dawn and slipped outside to hang homemade ornaments on the evergreen pine Sam and I planted last spring. Each one painted with words I used to whisper only in my journal: worth, brave, unbreakable. By midday, our backyard looked like a memory come to life. White lights twinkled among red berries. A wreath I'd crafted from lavender and holly hung on the fence. Friends arrived, women who once sat in my DMs, strangers who became sisters. We sipped spiced cider and shared plates of roasted vegetables and peppermint brownies. No awkward silences, no forced cheer. Just real joy. Someone asked if I missed him. I froze for a moment, then shook my head. Not at all, I said, and I meant it. There was nothing left in that memory except lessons for him, for me, for everyone who ever thought leaving was weakness. Because leaving can be the strongest choice you ever make. That afternoon, I called the orphanage I'd partnered with. We'd arranged for a holiday party for kids whose families couldn't afford gifts. I stood at the gates with dozens of wrapped boxes, handpicked by my team, and watched the children's faces light up. One little girl hugged me so tight I almost cried in front of her. "Thank you, Auntie," she whispered. Auntie. It was a title I'd never imagined, but one I cherished more than any ring or ceremony. Later, Sam and I snuck away to the porch again. The sky was purple and gold. The world felt vast and forgiving. He slipped a hand into mine and said, "You built all this from ashes." I looked back at the twinkling lights, at the laughter drifting from the windows, and realized he was right. "And you kept it alive," I replied. His eyes "We did," he said. The rest of that night was a blur of carols and candlelight. We danced barefoot on the deck, held hands under blankets by the fire. I let the warmth soak into every scar I'd carried, imagining them closing gently like old wounds finally meeting fresh skin. When I woke the next morning, the world was silent again, except for the faint hum of possibility. I made breakfast, eggs with chives, toast with honey, and sat alone at the table. I looked at the spot where he used to sit. A gentle smile curved my lips. It was no longer haunted by absence. It was a seat saved for whoever came next: joy, ambition, love, or simply myself. That weekend, I hosted a workshop for entrepreneurs who had their worlds upended. I coached them on turning heartbreak into hustle, grief into growth. One man said, "You make it sound beautiful." I told him, "Beauty and pain are neighbors. You just have to learn which one to invite in." Projects multiplied, a new product line donated part of profits to women's shelters, a scholarship fund launched for creative students, a mentorship program pairing survivors with industry leaders. Every initiative felt like another brick in the bridge from my past to my future. Then came the call from a major network. They wanted to film a documentary. "Your story," the producer said. is the voice of an entire generation. I hesitated. Cameras made me nervous. But I remembered those early nights, scribbling in the dark. I remembered the power of a single spark. I agreed. We filmed on that same porch where everything changed, where I burned the letter, where I toasted my rebirth. We spoke of betrayal and bravery, of loss and legacy. And when the cameras left, I felt lighter, as if watching my own healing on screen had given me one final exhale. That small conversation reminded me how ripples of one choice can transform a sea of doubt into an ocean of possibility. My empire wasn't just numbers or projects, it was every life touched by the decision to vanish from toxicity and reappear in self-love. One evening, while packing for a retreat in Bali, I stumbled upon an old voicemail from him. His voice was shaky, remorseful. "I miss you," he said. My finger hovered over the delete button. I pressed it. Not out of cruelty, but because I was no longer a page in someone else's voicemail inbox. In Bali, I led a sunrise ceremony on the beach. Participants wrote messages to their past on leaves and released them into the waves. I watched as each leaf drifted away, imagining the weight of their burdens carried off by the tide. And at that moment, I understood, forgiveness and freedom aren't the same. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. Freedom is the choice to reclaim your story. By the time I returned home, the world had shifted. My podcast hit #1 on the charts. My TEDx talk went viral. But the sweetest victory? A quiet message from a young artist. "Because of you, I found my palette again." I paused my expansion plans to host an art mentorship program in my hometown. We converted an old warehouse into a studio. Spray paint murals covered the walls, messages like "Your story is your superpower" and "Fly free" adorned every surface. One night, under fluorescent lights and the hum of creative energy, a former friend of mine who had once tried to sabotage me, walked in. She looked around, awestruck. Our eyes met. There was no malice left in her gaze, only something like envy. I walked up and held out my hand. "Welcome," I said. "This is what happens when you turn pain into purpose." That handshake was another chapter closed, another victory earned. It wasn't about gloating, it was about showing that kindness can coexist with strength. By spring, I had written the first draft of my memoir, Empire of One, tracing every step from that Christmas barbecue to this moment. My publisher called it a blueprint for rebirth. I laughed. I hoped it would be more a bond between every woman who opened its pages and found her own voice. As my memoir launched, I hosted a reading at my favorite bookstore. The room was packed. Tears fell. Applause thundered. I closed the reading with the lines that had become my mantra: "Disappearing was not defeat. It was the prelude to my resurgence." Later, I learned he'd watched the trailer. Rumor said he was shattered. But the only shattering I ever cared about was the one inside me. The walls of fear and self-doubt that collapsed to reveal who I was truly meant to be. In that silence, I heard a new voice, my own. Stronger than any insult, clearer than any lie, louder than the laughter that once hurt me. So here, at the end of this chapter, I stand. Not as a victim, not as a wife defined by her husband's betrayal, but as an empire of one, built on courage, thriving on truth, unstoppable by any storm. If you're reading this and wondering if you should stay or go, let my story be your guide. Disappear from what dims you. Reappear as everything you deserve to be, and never, ever let someone else's smallness define your worth. That's not revenge, that's redemption. And it's yours for the taking. Merry Christmas. To new beginnings. To fierce peace. To the empires we build from our ashes. There was a quiet morning in January when I realized something profound. I was no longer haunted by waiting for him to notice, waiting for family drama, waiting for validation. Instead, I was filled with anticipation for every blank page I could fill with my own words, every new dawn I could greet on my own terms. I began hosting monthly empowerment circles at my studio. Women would gather on plush rugs, sip spiced tea, and share stories they'd never dared tell before. There were tears, yes, but there was also laughter that rang like church bells, purging pain with its clarity. One woman, timid at first, finally spoke the words that had imprisoned her. I stayed because I thought I owed him loyalty. I left because I owed myself hope. Our circle became a movement. Soon, I was traveling to different cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, speaking not just about my Christmas betrayal, but about the universal fight to reclaim identity. I saw faces in auditoriums that shone with recognition. They weren't listening to me, they were hearing themselves. Meanwhile, back home, my business doubled its revenue. We launched a line of confidence journals, each page lined with prompts designed to peel back shame and coax out courage. Every journal sold funded a therapy session for a survivor in need. One afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation. My ex-husband's cousin Sarah asked to meet. She was the young woman I'd once scared when I caught him cheating. Now, her eyes were soft, regretful. "I wanted to say thank you," she said awkwardly. "Because you showed me how not to settle." I nodded. "Thank you for saying that, but please know, you never need my permission to choose yourself." At sunset, I slipped away to the barbecue pit and found a child there tossing pebbles into the ashes. I knelt beside him and taught him how to plant seeds instead. He looked at me with wonder as wildflowers took root in that scorched earth. Walking back inside, I passed guest room now, my vibrant studio, and smiled at the transformation. Silk curtains fluttered where he once stood with another woman, and the scent of betrayal was gone, replaced by paint and possibility. That night I curled up in bed with my journal and wrote a single sentence that felt like home. I vanished so I could return to myself. I traced the words with my fingertip and fell asleep, knowing each letter was proof of my own resilience. Tomorrow I would wake and write more and build more and love more. But tonight I slept in the quiet, triumphant hush of a woman who knew her worth and refused to ever shrink again. I remember waking up to the hum of the city outside my window. The world was moving on, and so was I. I dressed in my favorite mustard dress, the one that swirled around my knees and reminded me that life needed color after so many shades of gray. I met my team at the office, where laughter bounced off the walls and ideas grew louder than doubt ever had. We dove into strategy for the next product launch, brainstorming names that spoke of courage rather than comfort. Testing prototypes felt like armor made of silk. Someone suggested Phoenix, and I grinned, because rising from ashes had become our anthem. That afternoon I got a call from my sister. She said she wanted to invest in my business with money she'd hidden away for emergencies. Tears poured behind my eyes because she believed in me. Before anyone did. I thanked her and promised we'd grow this empire together, sisterhood stronger than any contract. When evening came, I changed into jeans and a leather jacket and met Sam at our favorite taco stand. We shared laughter and spicy salsa and dreams about the beachfront studio we'd open someday in Costa Rica, where the waves would echo our voices talking about freedom. Driving home, I passed the barbecue pit and slowed the car to look at it, bathed in streetlight. I whispered, "Thank you for that night, because without that crack in my world, I never would have built this one." Sometimes I still feel the ghost of old fears, but they're smaller now, lost beneath layers of growth. Back home, I found an email from the publisher. They wanted a second book, Guide to Building Resilience from the Ground Up. I leaned against the wall and laughed out loud, because that scared little girl who stayed silent would never believe this was possible. But this woman here, she's unstoppable. Before bed I sat by the window watching the moon rise over the city skyline, one silver shard of light, cutting through the darkness, and I whispered to myself, "I am the moonlighting on betrayal with radiance," and I smiled as sleep claimed me in that fierce, gentle way of someone who knows she's finally home. The next morning felt different, not because the sun was brighter or the air crisper, but because I no longer carried that invisible weight across my chest. I opened the window and let the breeze sweep into my room like a guest I'd been waiting for. I stood there barefoot, letting the chill kill my skin, not to feel anything dramatic, but just to remind myself that I was alive and unafraid. Afterwards, a young man approached me, his voice quiet, eyes bright. "My mom, she left him after reading your story. She's rebuilding her life now." I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. That was the multiplier effect, one story giving permission to thousands. That summer, I stood before my team, women from every walk of life. "We've built something extraordinary," I told them. "But the most extraordinary part? Our stories. Every triumph, every scar, every step back, and every leap forward. We raised our glasses, sparkling water, because health and clarity deserved celebration. And there, in that moment, I realized, my empire was never about money or recognition. It was about cultivating a legacy of resilience, a lineage of women who knew they were not their worst experiences, but the alchemists of their own destiny. The leaves turn to gold that fall, and I hosted a harvest festival at the studio. Pumpkins, bonfires, poetry, music. I read an excerpt from the memoir, "We are the sum of every moment we chose ourselves over comfort. We are empires built from ashes, crowned by our own courage." As the moon rose that night, I slipped away from the crowds and walked to the old barbecue pit, where it all began. I knelt beside the embers, scattering wildflower seeds. "Thank you," I whispered into the smoke, "for lighting the fire that forged me." And so this part of my story continues, ever evolving, ever expanding, from Christmas betrayal to global inspiration, from guest room humiliation to boardroom vindication, from disappearing in shame to vanishing only to reappear as history's fiercest author. And then one morning, I woke up to the sound of my own laughter echoing through the house. I realized I hadn't heard it in years, not since before the betrayal, before the doors slammed on my dignity, before I learned what it meant to feel small. I poured my coffee on the porch as the sun spilled gold over the lawn where we once grilled burgers and lies. I let the warmth wash over me instead of shivers of fear. The wind carried the scent of pine and possibility, and I breathed it in like a promise. That day I invited the women from my first empowerment circle back to the studio. Some came with smiles, hesitant at first, now bright like they'd rediscovered their own light. We cooked lunch together, told stories with hands in dough and our hearts wide open. We spoke of the future not in whispers, but in cheers of growth, of dreams taking shape, of empires built from the rubble of broken vows and shattered trust. The room hummed with energy that felt more real than any applause could ever be. My phone buzzed with messages from women across the world, some sharing stories of how they walked away too, others sending photos of journals filled with affirmations they once doubted they deserved. I answered as many as I could with trembling fingers, because these weren't just followers, they were survivors and sisters in spirit. I sat in my car parked outside the new office building, the one I'd almost been too scared to lease months ago, and stared at the sign that now bore my name in gold. Not his name, not a shared dream, but mine, built from nothing but nerve. Nights I didn't think I'd survive. The receptionist greeted me with the warmth of someone who believed in what we were building, and my assistant handed me coffee with a post-it note that read, "You inspire me daily." And for a second, I had to blink away the sting behind my eyes, because this was real, this was mine. That afternoon, I joined a live stream with over 50,000 viewers, and told the story of how I once sat silent at a barbecue while the man I loved burned down our life with lies. I told them how I rose, how I fought back, not with anger but with purpose, and how I built an empire from the ruins of that night. When I finished, the comments were a flood of hope and hearts, and someone simply wrote, "I left him today because of you." Later that week, I walked into a bookstore and saw a group of women gathered around a table with my memoir in their hands, reading aloud under soft lighting and candles. I didn't interrupt, I just stood there, invisible and full of light, watching my pain become someone else's permission slip to begin again. The holidays rolled in fast, but this year they didn't come with dread. They came with anticipation, with boxes of decorations I bought on purpose and invitations I wrote with joy, not obligation. Our annual party was bigger this time, hosted at the new center we opened for women re-entering the workforce. I gave a toast that ended with tears, but they weren't sad, were sacred. I said to the room full of survivors, business owners, mothers, daughters, and dreamers, if you had told me back then that my heartbreak would turn into healing, not just for me but for all of you, I would have laughed through tears. But here we are, standing taller than we ever thought we could. And the room roared with applause, and I felt the kind of peace that wraps around your ribs like armor made of grace. That night I lit a single candle in my bedroom, turned off the lights, and whispered thank you to the woman I used to be, for surviving. Thank you to the fire for forcing me to rise, and thank you to the silence for teaching me how loud my own voice could become. I woke up the next day with a strange sense of calm, like my spirit had finally caught up to the life I'd created. No more chasing, no more proving, just presence, purpose woven into my morning like sunlight through the curtains. I made coffee slowly, the way I used to watch my grandmother do it, careful, intentional, like every small step mattered. The phone rang, and it was my lawyer confirming the final signature on the last property deal we'd been negotiating for months. The new center for single mothers would be built just 2 blocks from where I used to cry in parking lots, wondering if I'd ever be seen again. And now, wasn't just seen, I was building lighthouses for others to find their way home too. I spent the afternoon visiting our mentorship program, where teenage girls gathered in circles on the floor dreaming out loud, without fear. They asked me how I knew I was ready to start over, and I told them the truth. You're never ready, but one day, you'll want peace more than you want answers. And that's when you leap. One girl stood up and read a poem she'd written about her mother being left behind, and how she promised herself she'd never need saving, and I clapped so hard my hands ached, because that girl, that strength, that fire, that was why I kept going. Later, I sat in my car outside the studio, just breathing, just letting the world move without needing to chase it for once. I played a voicemail my friend had left me days ago, but I hadn't had time to hear. She said, "You don't realize it, but your voice is what plays in my head when I almost give up." I sat there in silence, letting that sink in, letting the echo of impact fill the car until I cried soft, steady tears of gratitude. That weekend I flew to New York for a conference where I was the keynote speaker, and the moment I stepped on stage in front of thousands, I didn't feel fear. I felt like I was stepping into my own light. I spoke without a script. I told the story of betrayal and rebirth, and halfway through the room went so quiet I could hear someone sob in the front row. Afterward, people lined up to hug me, to thank me. One woman whispered, "My husband said those exact words to me, and I thought I was crazy, but you just showed me I'm not alone." I held her hand and told her, "No, you are not alone. Not anymore. Not ever again." Back home, I found a package on my doorstep wrapped in plain brown paper, and inside was a letter from an anonymous sender, just one line written in bold black ink. "Your courage gave me mine." I didn't need to know who it was, because I already knew the ripple effect had reached beyond what I could see. That night I lay in bed and thought about the woman I used to be, the one who doubted herself in every mirror, and held her breath every time he came home late, and I wanted to reach back in time and whisper in her ear, "One day you'll be so free he won't even be a footnote." The days began to feel lighter, not because life became easy, but because I stopped carrying what wasn't mine to hold. I stopped rewriting history to make room for people who were only meant to be lessons, not lifelines. And in that release I found the unexpected gift of all, peace that didn't ask me to earn it. I remember walking through the local market where everything once reminded me of him. The bakery with the cinnamon rolls he never let me finish, the bookstore we used to walk past but never enter. This time I bought the cinnamon roll and sat inside that bookstore for 2 hours, with a novel in my lap and freedom in my chest. People began to stop me in places I never expected. An elderly woman at a gas station who said, "My granddaughter made me watch your video and I finally left after 43 years. A young man at the airport who said, "My mother started painting again because of your podcast." And each time I heard their words, I realized I had become the person I needed when I was breaking. I spent afternoons writing letters to myself, the girl I was, the woman I became, and the one I was still becoming. Each letter started the same, "Dear me, I'm proud of you," and ended the same, "Keep going, you're just getting started." That summer I was invited to speak at a gala in Los Angeles. They flew me in first class, something I used to dream about while scrubbing floors and crying in bathrooms. And when I walked on stage in the gold dress that hugged my courage like armor, I looked around and saw my past, not behind me but cheering for me from every seat. In my speech I didn't talk about pain, I talked about power, not the kind that controls, but the kind that heals, the kind that whispers, "I will rise even when no one is watching." And when I stepped down from the stage, I was met by a woman with trembling hands, who said, "You reminded me that I was never weak, just tired of pretending to be okay." The next morning, I stood on the hotel balcony, overlooking the ocean, the sun rising slow and solid, and I whispered thank you to every version of me that held on just long enough to reach this view. The waves didn't answer, but I knew they heard me. When I returned home, I found the old wedding photo I thought I had thrown out, It was tucked between some forgotten books in the attic, and instead of rage I felt nothing. Not numbness, not denial, just the absence of longing, and that absence felt holy. I took the photo outside and placed it gently in the fire pit, not as an act of revenge, but of release, and as the edges curled and the colors faded, whispered, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." That night I danced alone in my kitchen, barefoot in sweatpants, music blasting, hair, wild hands in the air, and I laughed until tears rolled down my cheeks, because joy like that cannot be faked, it can only be reclaimed. And so the season turned again, golden leaves whispering through the streets like old friends returning home. I stood outside the new center we opened just in time for the holidays, a place where women could gather, eat, laugh, heal. And it hit me, this was the dream I never dared speak out loud, now living, breathing, glowing in front of me. Inside, candles flickered against brick walls as stories were shared over plates of warm food, not fairy tales, but real, raw stories of women who chose to stay standing even when everything around them said fall, and I watched from the corner, smiling so hard it hurt. One woman stood, the speak voice shaking but heart unshaken. She said, "I came here broken, and now I'm building something, not because someone else made space for me, but because I made space for myself." The room clapped, the kind of clap that feels like prayer and thunder all at once. Later I sat outside under a sky full of stars, the kind of sky that reminds you how small you are, and how infinite you've become at the same time. I thought about that Christmas night, that joke, that betrayal, that moment where I felt like nothing. And I smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer owned me. I wrote my final journal entry for the year on that porch, hands cold, breath visible, heart wide open. I wrote, "I have become the woman they tried to break, the one they joked would disappear, and instead I became unforgettable, not for what I survived, but for what I chose to become after." That night I got a text from a woman I had never met. She said, "I found your story at 3 a.m. and I think it saved me." I stared at that message for a long time, then whispered into the dark, "If that's all I ever do, it's enough." Because healing isn't loud, it's quiet, consistent. A series of choices stacked like bricks until one day you realize you've built a cathedral where pain once stood. And every step, every heartbreak, every lie led you to the truth of yourself. And in that truth you find your crown, not made of gold but of grit. Not given, but earned, and you wear it, not for the world but for the girl who thought she'd never be whole again. So if you're reading this, if you've ever been told you'd disappear or believed you were too broken to matter, I need you to hear this with every bone in your body. You are not disposable, you are divine. Your silence is over, your power is rising, your empire is waiting. Now go build it.